Always remember, we must have a positive state of mind when dealing with problems. Think, is there anything positive about this situation I am in? Being positive does not mean we neglect the negative. We must constructively deal with negative situations whilst simultaneously focusing on the positive. Just like our tongue can be obsessed with something stuck in our teeth, our mind has a default setting to be obsessed about the negative. Gratitude is a state of being that allows us to see the positive. It comes from realizing that there is good in the world, that some of that good is with us, and that those good things are coming from an external reality. That state of consciousness imbibes us with positivity. Even in times of difficulty and sorrow, we can feel inner strength, when we are grateful for the support of caring friends and family. 5. Press pause. Stop and reflect on your life regularly. Pressing the pause button to practice gratitude is the way to make it a constant in your life. I love those who can smile in trouble, who can gather strength from distress, and grow brave by reflection. Leonardo da Vinci once said, "'Tis the business of little minds to shrink, but they whose heart is firm, and whose conscience approves their conduct, will pursue their principles unto death." Worley Seaface has some of the most expensive homes in the city. Business tycoons, movie stars, and even cricket players, the postcode is littered with famous names. I pointed at one of the new builds shooting up. "That belongs to one of my close friends," I said. Harry looked at me with surprise. "I was under the impression that I would be your richest friend," he said, shrugging innocently. "You are one of them, of course. For your age, no one can mock your success. But these people are playing in another league. This building is going to be 10 floors. Harry bent his neck to look outside my window to see men in thin neon jackets and yellow helmets hard at work, constructing a billionaire's paradise. "I wish I could afford an apartment in it," he said. "I think you misunderstood, Harry. The 10 floors are just for the businessman's family, there are no separate apartments." With my friend's mouth wide open, I continued. "The fact is that I'm sure this man works as hard, if not harder than you. He's the chairman and chief executive officer of one of India's most prosperous companies. But I know him personally, and therefore I know that he always makes time to reflect on the positives. It's psychological. When we are thankful for what we have, we become poised to receive more. Otherwise, we tend to squander opportunities that may come before us. That is true for business as relationships. We must prioritize our gratitude. We must press pause and stop to smell the roses." Joshua Bell. It was Hans Christian Andersen who said, "When words fail, music speaks." But that is only the case if you make time to listen. Over 10 years ago, a short, unassuming article was published in one of America's leading newspapers, The Washington Post. The paper is famous for covering the nation's political landscape, but this piece was different. It was about a social experiment that highlighted some harsh truths about the society we live in. Most of the mid-level bureaucrats disembark at L'Enfant Plaza Station, located in the heart of Federal Washington. On Friday, January 12, 2007, as people slurped coffee and scarfed down donuts, as they scurried off to work, an inconspicuous man, in jeans and a t-shirt, stood next to a dustbin inside the station playing a violin. In a city like Mumbai, it would not be considered highly dignified for someone to play music on the street. The perception in the States is different. They are not part of the aristocracy, but not considered impoverished either. They are just seen as street performers, who can at times attract quite a crowd and media attention. If you see someone playing music in a public area, do you stop and listen? Do you ever give any change to show your kindness? Or do you hurry past in guilt, fearful of your lack of time? That winter morning, the Washington Post conducted an experiment to see if people would stop for one of the finest classical musicians in the world, playing the most elegant music ever written, on one of the most expensive violins ever crafted. Would they accept their free front row ticket to witness the musical genius, or squander their opportunity, as they rushed to Capitol Hill? The artist was the internationally renowned violinist, Joshua Bell. 39 at the time of the experiment, Bell had swapped the concert hall for the Metro Hall, and an adoring audience to one who may just ignore him. Days before the experiment, Bell had filled Boston's stately Symphony Hall, where run-of-the-mill seats sell for $100. This was a test of context, perception, and priorities. Would people pause to appreciate beauty when it's right in front of them? Bell was a child prodigy. His parents, both psychologists, decided to get him formal training when they noticed that their 4-year-old was making music with rubber bands. He would stretch them, opening and closing them across side cabinets, to vary the pitch. His fame was amplified as a teenager. Does nothing less than tell human beings why they bother to live, one magazine interview commented. But would the humans at the train station tell him that? Would the masses recognize this disguised genius playing perfect masterpieces on a violin worth $3.5 million? So what do you think? A free concert by one of the world's most famous musicians. You would expect a swarm of commuters around him. The opposite happened. It was at 3 minutes that a middle-aged man glanced at Joshua for a split second, but kept walking. 30 seconds later, a woman threw in $1 and dashed away. It was 6 minutes later that someone leaned against the wall, and listened. The stats were dismal. In the 45 minutes that Joshua Bell played, 7 people stopped and hung around for at least a minute, 27 gave money, amassing a grand total of $32. This left 1,070 people who were oblivious to the miracle happening only a few feet away from them. The Washington Post recorded Bell's whole performance secretly, creating a time-lapse video of any incidents, or in this case, lack of them. Even at this accelerated pace, though, the fiddler's movements remain fluid and graceful. He seems so apart from his audience, unseen, unheard, otherworldly, that you find yourself thinking that he's not really there. A ghost. Only then do you see it. He is the one who is real. They are the ghosts, the article said. Can we label the 1,000 people who ignored Bell as unsophisticated? Not necessarily. The German philosopher Immanuel Kant said that the context of a situation matters. One's ability to appreciate beauty is related to one's ability to make moral judgments, he said. But to do this, the viewing conditions must be optimal. Art in a gallery and art in a coffee shop are going to be treated differently. In the coffee shop, the art may be more expensive and of a higher value, but there is no reason to pay attention as people sip a variety of mochaccino's. In most galleries, the optimal conditions have been created to appreciate beauty. Light in the right place, enough room between the art and the viewer, a description of the piece, etc. Funnily enough, many have lost ordinary objects in art galleries later to find that people are gathered around them taking pictures thinking that they are exhibits. Context manipulates our perspective. Therefore, we cannot make judgments about people's ability to appreciate beauty because Bell did just look like a humdrum violinist. However, what does this say about our ability to appreciate life? I have found that we as a people have got busier over time. We tend to exclude parts of our lives which are not directly related to hard work and accumulating wealth. The construct of the modern world is such that we have less time to press pause, and appreciate beauty. Minding their own business, stressed, with their eyes forward, People on the escalator ignoring Joshua Bell have the capacity to understand beauty, but it seems irrelevant to their lives, so they choose not to. If we cannot take a moment to listen to the beautiful music, played by one of the best musicians on the planet, if the drive of modern life suppresses us, so that we are deaf and blind to that spectacle, what else are we missing? Prioritize and practice gratitude. Naturally, the sea face attracts all types of people. Tourists snapping away, with only the Bandra, Worli Sea link between them and the horizon, families strolling, couples holding hands and runners doing what they do best. The road had become a parking lot again. Do you see him over there? I gestured at a man, who seemed 25 years old, working out on the pavement. A body like that does not come by chance. It must take years of practice to achieve what he has. It takes years of working late nights to create an overnight success. It looked like his muscles had been chiseled, his arm bigger than the average man's legs. Harry tensed his left arm and visually measured his biceps. He laughed, realizing his lack of muscle in comparison to the Hercules now doing push-ups on the beach. Similarly, we must train the muscle of the mind. To some, gratitude is a natural disposition, to others, it's a conscious priority. But like any muscle, you must use it or lose it. At heightened levels of practice, we do not need to consciously practice gratitude, we live in gratitude. That's a joy like no other, never missing moments like Joshua Bell. How do I reach that stage? Harry questioned eagerly. There is one evidence-based thing we can do. The only price is commitment and consistency. This is writing a gratitude log daily, which is based on 3 principles of gratitude: recognize, remember, and reciprocate. Wow, thank you. Please tell me more. Harry interjected. Exactly, thank and you are 2 words that have so much power, but are overused without understanding. Let me explain, I said. We should firstly recognize what good has been done to us to say thank you. This is easy to do in the moment, like when someone holds the door for us or buys us a hot drink. The next stage is to remember what others have done for us to mean that thank you. Contemplation is by far one of the best methods to develop gratitude. Spending time with our own mind in silence, without any gadgets to stimulate us, and contemplating on who has helped us internalizes our gratitude. Harry hummed and nodded as if contemplating on someone at that moment. Finally, we should reciprocate. We should live a thank you. Saying and meaning a thank you moves to the next level through our actions. Beyond words and feelings, to truly give back is the basis of living a life of long-lasting gratitude. So what are you grateful for? Well, I guess I'm grateful for this traffic jam that I have time to spend with you. With incessant horns surrounding us, I explain the gratitude log in more detail. Gratitude log. This log can be kept on your phone and written on your journey to work, or you may want to write it in your diary in a quiet space. This is a simple exercise that will take approximately 10 minutes a day to do, and there are no hard or fast rules. It is best to do this activity in the morning, because starting your day with gratitude will leave you feeling positive for the rest of the day. Exercise. Reflect on the last 24 hours and identify 3 to 5 people or situations that you are grateful for. The more descriptive you are, the easier it will be to excavate the emotion of gratitude from within you. The daily description should consist of 3 to 5 people or things you are grateful for, and once every week, it should contain 3 to 5 action points to thank the people you are grateful for. You can be grateful for anything, something as simple as someone smiling at you, giving you a seat on the train, or a coworker buying you lunch. We cannot repay every action of kindness towards us, but we can start with the people closest to us. Pick one of your weekly gratitude action points and act on it. Did you thank your partner for cooking your dinner? Did you thank your mother for washing your clothes? Did you thank your partner for paying the bills? And importantly, what actions you will take to thank them. Write it down and feel the happiness you felt when the good was done unto you. We were still bumper to bumper. It's a great exercise, I said. It doesn't have to be long or wordy, just honest about what you are thankful for that day. He paused, appearing contemplative again. Can I ask you something personal? He asked nervously. It was rare for people to ask me questions about myself, but it was a refreshing change. Relationships are about give and take. Of course. You have shared stories of your life with me. What would you like to know about mine? Have you ever been in a situation where you found it impossible to be grateful, where you could see no silver lining? Another silence fell between us. Do you want to know how my first video went viral? It was not something I wanted, and when it was happening, I certainly was not grateful, I said, thinking about that disturbing time. I talk about the episode in the next chapter. For now, let's summarize this chapter on gratitude. Always remember, we must learn how to press pause and reflect on what we are grateful for. It is not good enough to say that we are too busy to be grateful. If we do not press pause, how many beautiful moments of our life are we missing? The ways to start practicing gratitude are, to recognize the good that has been done unto us and say thank you, to remember the good and mean it, and to reciprocate through actions of giving back and live by the same values. Gratitude is not merely an emotion, it is a way of life which can be learned and practiced. We must prioritize the time to practice gratitude, and one of the many ways to do it is by writing a gratitude log daily. 6. Why worry? When things are beyond your control and there is nothing you can do, why worry? Leo Buscaglia once said, "Worry never robs tomorrow of its sorrow, it only saps today of its joy." One sultry evening, as I sat typing away at my laptop in my room, I received a WhatsApp message from a friend of mine. It did not look like anything out of the ordinary, but it had the potential to ruin my life. However, before I elaborate, I think it is important to tell the story of WhatsApp's success for the benefit of those readers who are not familiar with how it came about. WhatsApp, as we all may know, is a free messaging and calling application that anyone can download, anywhere in the world except China. It was founded by Brian Acton, a software engineer who graduated from Stanford. Acton worked at Apple first and then Yahoo for around a dozen years, until in 2007, he decided to travel to South America for a year with his friend and colleague Jan Koum. On their return, both of them applied to Facebook and Twitter for jobs, but both were rejected. Acton tweeted in May 2009, "Got denied by Twitter HQ. That's okay. Would have been a long commute." A few months later, in August 2009, he followed it up with another tweet, "Facebook turned me down. It was a great opportunity to connect with some fantastic people. Looking forward to life's next adventure." And his next adventure changed the world. In the same year that he got rejected, on his birthday, WhatsApp was incorporated in Silicon Valley, California. The app grew exponentially, its success unparalleled. So much so that in 2014, Facebook decided to buy it, for a staggering $19 billion. By December 2017, WhatsApp had 1.5 billion active users. Now that you have a clearer picture of the reach of WhatsApp, you will be able to appreciate my concern when I tell you that it was the same app that people used to share a potentially controversial video of me which went viral. My phone buzzed. I had received a new message. A notification popped up saying I had received a video message from a friend whom I had not spoken to in years. Interesting to get a message from him. I'll read it later, I thought. I flipped my phone over. I did not want to be disturbed during my peak productive hours of the day. Another buzz. What could that be? My mind shifted to my phone again. I managed to ignore it. In hindsight, I should have just put my phone on silent mode, because for the next hour it buzzed ceaselessly. Now I had to check what the hoo-ha was about. 543,108 I typed in my passcode, which has now changed for anyone wondering, and opened my WhatsApp. I saw a flood of messages drowning my home page, some from group chats I'm a part of, but many from individuals whom I had connected with over the years. The messages had one thing in common: they all contained a 3.4 megabytes video. To my surprise, people had sent me a video of myself. It was a clip of a joke, edited out of context from one of the lectures I had given to an audience of 1,500 university students at our temple. Until then, a few videos of mine were gaining traction on YouTube, but tumbleweed gathered on my other social media platforms. I played the clip. In any school in India today, after 10 years of working, do you know how much a teacher would save on average? Probably a lakh or 2 lakh rupees, I was saying. So far, so good. No danger detected. I was sitting on a raised cushion in our main temple hall, animatedly speaking into the microphone. A software engineer in India today, after 10 years of working, do you know how much he will earn on an average? Probably 40 or 50 lakh rupees. Nothing controversial yet. Then I went on: an Indian politician, not a good one, but a corrupt one, after 10 years of earning through scams, will save around 30 to 40 crore. A few heads would turn at that statement. Corruption in politics is a sensitive issue in India. The next group I commented on, of which I am also a part, but not in regards to wealth, is why I started receiving furious messages. Imagine what people who are wearing this can earn. I grabbed my khadi saffron top. Most monks in India wear only saffron to represent their renunciation. One very spiritual man, a guru in India, his 10-year savings were 238 rupees crore only. Another man, a spiritual, religious leader, his 10-year savings were 1,177 rupees crore only. And yet another man, again a religious leader, his savings were 4,000 rupees crore only. The crowd was silent. Though it was just a joke and I wasn't referring to anyone in particular, a few people giggled, imagining whom I could have been referring to. Choose your career wisely, I exclaimed. The audience burst into rapturous laughter and applause. It echoed around the marble walls. A few students were rolling over, laughing hysterically. The video was cut short there. At first, I was thrilled that people were enjoying my talk. Human nature is such that when we please others, we feel pleased ourselves. But when I scrolled through a few more messages on WhatsApp, it was clear that there was a mixed response. How can a saffron-clad monk like yourself say something so derogatory about India's spiritual gurus like that? One message said. I found this a little offensive, said another. Many messages expressed the same tone of disapproval. How unfair, I thought initially. That video was part of a broader discourse to make the point that we focus on earning at the expense of our learning in our professional lives. I love to entertain the crowd, but only to teach life lessons. I am a monk after all, not a comedian. At that point, my mind went into overdrive. What if this gets into the wrong hands? What if some spiritual gurus are offended? What if they complain to my ashram or the institution I am a part of or my guru? Will I bring shame to the community? Will I be banned from speaking in public? Will they sue me for defamation? I meant no offense to those spiritual leaders. Many of them I know personally. They are pure, sincere, and use the income they generate for constructive purposes. As messages questioning my conduct rolled in, however, I could not help but think of the worst-case scenario. What if? I was not grateful for this situation at all. After my initial agitation, I became defensive. I started to prepare for the inevitable, planning in my head how I would explain this to my saffron-clad brethren. I even called one of my friends who was a lawyer to draft a statement in case litigation was an issue. He assured me it would not be, but my anxiety got the better of me. Each new WhatsApp message caused my blood pressure to rise. It did not get better in the evening. As the moon shone outside, I lay with my eyes wide open all night, clenching my thin blanket up to my chin, using it as a shield. When I was a child, I imagined a monster living under my bed, but now the only thing tormenting me was my phone charging there. I usually rise at 4 a.m. for my morning meditations. I rubbed my eyes and rose groggily as expected. Sitting on my wooden bed, I contemplated what had happened and what could happen. Picking up my phone, I feared the worst. I adjusted to the glare and went immediately to WhatsApp. I found multiple messages sharing my own video with me, some with anger and others with love. I sighed in relief, but it had only been 12 hours since the first person sent me the tormenting clip. I was still anxious. This lasted until I received a photo message from another monk. It is incredible how the mind works. At one moment you fear for your life, and a second later, you are entirely peaceful. Like a message from the heavens, I received a flowchart entitled, "Why Worry?" I pulled out the infographic from my favorites folder on my phone and showed it to Harry. "Could you please share that with me?" he inquired. "Definitely," I replied, forwarding the image to him. For years I had been practicing spirituality, but I had never seen the principle of detachment from things beyond our control put so simply. Sometimes the simple explanations touch the heart the most. No fancy language or abstract concepts, just essential truths presented modestly to awaken the soul. Simple ideas are accepted universally. That is why I think a clip of my lecture on the concept of why worry was shared on Instagram by Sean Combs, better known as P. Diddy, one of the most renowned rap artists in the world. It's impossible to stop a clip once it's gone viral on the internet. When we have a problem beyond our control, we have to turn to our spiritual strength and ask, why worry? Whether or not we can do something about it, our response should not be anxiety. Learning to detach ourselves from situations that are outside our control is an imperative skill to learn for personal growth. This is not to say I favor laziness. We should do everything in our power to try and rectify the situation, but after that, we have to take our attention away from the unpleasant circumstance. What we see as bad at one point in time can turn out to be good for us, and what we see as good at another point in time can turn out to be bad for us. Most things in life are beyond our control. We should not judge any situation by its face value. A video that I thought would disrupt my life as I knew it turned out to be the greatest blessing. It allowed me to kickstart my journey to be able to try to help inspire millions across the globe through my social media presence, and even brought me the opportunity to convey my message through this book. So, I repeat, whatever situations may come our way, analyze, is this in my control? Regardless of the answer that follows, the reply should always be, why worry? I noticed that Harry looked relieved when I talked about this. I meditated on how when we hear things that are meaningful, our doubts are dispelled. The easiest way to bring clarity to our life is to seek guidance from people who possess clarity. Spiritual strength he brought up. His questions were not finished. To get to that level of detachment or state of gratitude, you need what you called spiritual strength. How do you get that? I was surprised at how attentively he had been listening even as he drove. When we are desperate, our senses become heightened and we become more attentive. Sometimes when we get engrossed in a problem, we feel trapped in our own minds, I said. In that state, we constantly regurgitate our issues, causing us a lot of emotional pain. A spiritual process gives us the ability to come out of this mental loop and helps transform the greatest difficulties into opportunities. 7. Spiritual practice. Spiritual practice is the foundation of our happiness. It guides us in times of turmoil and grounds us in times of joy. Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "Meditation can help us embrace our worries, our fear, our anger, and that is very healing." We let our own natural capacity of healing do the work. Spirituality is based on the premise that we live in this world, but we are not from it. Many of our problems lie in not understanding our fundamental identity. We are not human beings having spiritual experiences, we are spiritual beings having human experiences. It's impossible to realize this principle theoretically. We can attend hundreds of lectures and read volumes of books, but this is inadequate without us committing to a spiritual practice, or sadhana as it is known in Sanskrit. The simplest way to explain spiritual practice is to describe the hierarchy of connections. At any moment, we can be making three kinds of connections. Outside ourselves, the majority of our time is spent in connecting with the world, networking, relationships, our work. It's all crucial, but can lead us astray if we have no inner direction. The fear of missing out, thinking that the grass is greener elsewhere, and living a life out of balance are all symptoms of having incorrectly prioritized happiness outside of ourselves. Inside ourselves, beyond our everyday lives, many look for solace within. People struggling with life, those trying to work on themselves to conquer the external world, those curious about their inner world, and occasionally, a few of those seeking the truth. These are the types of people who will take the journey within. Above ourselves, those simply voyaging within can get frustrated by their lack of progress or direction. They can feel as though they're on a ship traveling at 70 knots per hour, but without a compass. Connecting above ourselves means re-establishing our relationship with God, or something higher than ourselves. God is one, and is identified differently across different cultures. Therefore, it is not about connecting to my God or your God, it is about connecting to our God. When this happens, it is as if a light bulb is getting connected to an entire powerhouse. A bulb on its own is just a piece of glass with a tungsten filament. It needs an electrical charge to experience light and give light to others. Similarly, it is our relationship with something higher than ourselves that can give us love and allow us to give love to others. Harry listened as I explained further. Just as there are many paths to get to our destination, there are many ways of connecting to God that transcend religious and sectarian boundaries. Many people practice prayer, a simple yet deeply effective method to become self-realized. I do practice prayer, but my preferred method for developing spiritual strength is through meditation. Out of the many types of meditation, I practice mantra meditation. This means I spend some time daily focusing my mind on sacred sounds, chanting the name of God, by which we can free ourselves of anxiety. Modern science recognizes the huge benefits of meditation, relieving us of stress, giving us a sense of purpose, thus enabling us to become more creative, amongst many other benefits. However, ancient Eastern literature gives us deeper insight. Meditation is like a plane, it first takes you high, then far away and then further away imperceptibly. I see meditation like a plane because when you take off, you immediately start gaining altitude. We experience worry and anxiety in life because we take things out of perspective. Meditation enables us to look down at all our anxieties, problems, and worries through a higher vantage point, thus giving us a great sense of peace and calmness. The deeper effect is that meditation carries us far. It completely transforms our character, develops the best of qualities within us and allows us to experience self-realization. Through meditation we become the best versions of ourselves. But this takes time and is often imperceptible. For example, if you look outside the window on a plane, it does not look like you are moving very fast. But 8 hours later, you're landing halfway across the world. Meditation becomes difficult because of our mind. It is said that the mind is like a restless monkey, always jumping from one thought to another. It does not become peaceful just because you say so. It needs to be controlled. Therefore, meditation is a discipline that helps us control the mind. For example, the trains of Mumbai keep the city's economy moving. But what keeps them traveling is the fact that they are bound by the tracks, schedule, and destinations. Similarly, the mind without being bound by the discipline of meditation will not be able to reach its destination. Some days it will feel like meditating, and some days it will not. Even understanding the concept of meditation takes time. I know many executives and celebrities practice it, but I've never felt like I have the time, Harry interrupted. He seemed to be feeling overwhelmed at the variety of concepts I had presented. People with no time to spare need it the most, I chuckled. I am now able to practice meditation for 2 hours a day. It was not like that in the beginning. I could cope with only 10 minutes a day when I initially started, and that didn't seem so daunting. Harry nodded, then asked, "After all this time, have you noticed any changes in your character?" "I have, quite honestly. One doesn't have to wait to see the effects of meditation in the afterlife. We can see them in this life if we practice it diligently enough and under the right guidance." He seemed impressed with that answer. "Do you remember what I said about the importance of gratitude earlier?" I asked. "Sure. People who meditate develop a habit of practicing sincere gratitude, which helps them in all their relationships. It is a relationship-strengthening emotion because it requires us to see how we've been supported and affirmed by other people." Harry began to fidget with the steering wheel again. "What's on your mind?" I asked. "I was thinking about how my wife and I treat each other," he said, ready to take our conversation forward, and I knew it was time to tell him about the second will of life. Always remember, we are not human beings having spiritual experiences, we are spiritual beings having human experiences. We are not this body, we are a spiritual being. We need to understand the hierarchy of connections. Ultimately, we must connect to something above ourselves, such as God. This can give us the power to spread happiness and joy around the world. There are many ways to connect to God. We may have our own, which is great, and we should go deeper into it. One of the most effective methods that has worked really well for me is mantra meditation. 8. Speaking sensitively. We should deal with each other sensitively. Our attitude towards life affects how we act in our relationships. King Solomon once said, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." "What do you mean how you treat your wife?" I asked him, alarmed. I had been to their house and found nothing amiss. Was there something he wasn't sharing? "It's not what it sounds like," he said, blushing. "It is just that we are constantly fighting and bickering. She always wants to change things about me, and I end up leaving the room when she starts with her suggestions. I was quite taken aback by his comments. How people behave in public can be very different from how they are in their private lives. Just a few minutes ago I was experiencing the warmth in the exchanges between you two, I said. I suppose we act differently depending on whose company we are in. He paused for a moment. How can we maintain the spark that we once had? What you witnessed at my home today was what it was constantly like in America when we were together, but it slowly started to fizzle out. Why does this happen? There was a series of things I wanted to say. I started by comforting him. This happens with all relationships, not just in marriages. If we are not proactive in our relationships, they start to seem dry and become cumbersome. We have to have respect for the other person, which is reflected in how sensitively we treat them. I had another anecdote to share. Harsh words fly. The wheels of the plane screeched as we landed on the tarmac of Heathrow Airport, London. As a crowd gathered in the aisle with people quick to disobey the fasten seatbelt sign, which was still on, I closed my eyes, still sitting in my seat, planning for what I needed to do at the terminal. It was my 9th time in London. By now I was used to long immigration lines, check-in bags already waltzing around the baggage carousel, and my friends waiting to pick me up at the arrivals. As the line to exit the plane thinned, I deftly unclipped my seat belt. This was the only part of the safety demonstration which I had mastered, and stretched lethargically. It had been a 10-hour flight from Mumbai. Torrential rains meant our plane was circling the English capital for 3/4 of an hour. A member of the crew brought my bag down from the cabin above, exemplifying their excellent service during the flight. Seeing my saffron robes, I felt they were biased towards me at times, giving me an extra pillow or a larger tomato juice. Although I never felt entitled to this, I thanked them. I tend to travel light when I go abroad. The great thing about being a monk is that you don't have to decide what to wear in the morning, orange every day, you don't need to worry about grooming your hair, you don't have any, and your bags are tiny, you own very little. Having fewer possessions frees one of anxiety, giving you more mind space for the vital things in life. Welcome to Heathrow, a sign read as I entered immigration. It had a picture of a beefeater on it. I don't mean a person who eats cows, but ceremonial guardians who would have been responsible for the safeguarding of the crown jewels, and looking after prisoners held at the Tower of London in the past. Walking down the slope towards the official entry point, a lady came running after me, weaving in between people, shouting, "Swamiji! Swamiji! Can I help you with your bag?" I was only carrying a small black laptop bag, and to take her help would have been awkward. "I'm good, thank you very much," I responded. People around us were now staring at us. "I can carry your bag." "It's not a problem," she persisted. No, I'm fine, but why don't we wait in the immigration line together?" I responded, intrigued by her persistence. Frequent international travel and social dealings have taught me a valuable lesson, which is to fight the strong urge to judge someone based on an initial interaction with them. Everyone has a fascinating story that we know nothing about. This lady seemed to be in her mid-30s. She was wearing a thick black fleece, which looked ready to face the British Spring, and she was carrying a small brown carry-on suitcase with 4 wheels. The corner of a dark blue passport was popping out of her fleece pocket. She was Indian. "I'm Mansi. Nice to meet you. Your bright saffron attire caught my eye," she said. "You can't miss me in these clothes," I replied, eliciting a half smile from her. "What do you do?" "I'm a scuba diving instructor," she announced proudly. "Incredible. We may need your assistance in this weather," I said politely. There had been storms all night, and the morning I landed, Typical of April on the British Isles. Are you a part of ISKCON? She asked abruptly. Her tone had now slightly changed. Small talk was over, I sensed. Time to talk business. ISKCON is the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, founded by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, who was affectionately addressed by his followers as Srila Prabhupada. She was correct, this was the institution of spiritually minded people I was a part of. Yes, I said hesitatingly, seeing the dissatisfaction on her face. She was quick to respond. Well, ISKCON Chowpatty is the worst ISKCON temple I have ever been to, she said, not knowing that it was the temple I had been a part of for over half my life. Why do you say so? Did you have a bad experience? I asked her. We both edged forward in the line. Yes, a terrible experience. Growing up, I've always been curious to find my spiritual path and wanted to study the Bhagavad Gita. I found a course online on the ISKCON Chowpatty website where I could study the Gita in depth, verse by verse. So I visited the admissions office in the temple, excited to sign up. Then Mansi's head lowered. I think she didn't want the others in the queue to overhear, but a few heads did turn towards us. I went to the desk, where a gentleman was sitting, busily typing away at his laptop with earphones on. She continued. A short while passed before he even realized that I was standing there, and then he pulled his left earphone out in frustration. How can I help you? What would you like? He snapped. A little thrown aback by his unpleasantness, I replied, I would like to do your long course on the Bhagavad Gita, please. Have you done the Journey of Self-Discovery course? He snapped again, without acknowledging my polite manners and my request. Yes, I have, at this temple. He paused and pulled his other earphone out, now looking directly into my eyes. Do you have a counselor? A counselor? I reacted. Why do I need a counselor? Everything is fine in my life. I did not know at that point that ISKCON Chowpatty has a mentorship system to coach spiritual enthusiasts, which they called the counselor system. I thought he was implying that I needed a psychological counselor because there was something wrong with me. He told me that unless I had a counselor, was a regular attendee of the temple programs, followed this rule and followed that rule, I could not take the course I wanted to take. He told me that the requirements were clearly mentioned on the website, and then putting his earphones back in, returned to his laptop, not waiting for me to respond. The instructions were not on the website, as far as I knew, and I had never heard of the ridiculous rules he was mentioning. I just wanted to study the Bhagavad Gita. He was so rude and unpleasant in his dealing with me that I felt judged and wronged in the very last place I would expect to be, in a temple. I never intend to go back to that temple, if that's the way people are allowed to behave. I tried to pacify Mansi, as a few people in the queue turned to look at me scornfully, overhearing her complaining. I am very sorry that this happened to you and you had this awful experience. It was irresponsible of him to deal with you in such a way. Trying to change the subject to something more positive, I said, so, you did this Journey of Self-Discovery course? Who was your lecturer on that course? I took the course with Gaur Gopal Das, she muttered. Was my face that forgettable? I laughed inwardly. It was the perfect time for some unbiased feedback, to see how well I was doing. She clearly had not realized that it was me she'd taken the course with. I gulped and said, so, how did you like the course? Was he good? Did you learn a lot in the course? He was fantastic. Spoke with so much clarity and humor. I gave a sigh of relief. A positive review. I cut her short before she could continue further, as too much praise can go straight to the head. "Madam, I am Gaur Gopal Das." "Can't be," she yelled in disbelief. The immigration officers looked up from their desks, surprised. But their faces reassumed their usual serious expressions in less than a second. Monsi's face also changed from brown to red. "I can show you my passport and documents if you like," I joked. "I am so sorry." "Sorry, but did you not wear glasses at that time?" "You don't seem to be wearing them any longer," she defended herself. "I did not mean to say that the whole of Iskanchowpatty was a bad place, but I was treated very badly and felt deeply hurt." I empathized with her and apologized on behalf of my ashram. "Please come back and visit us. The extended Gita course does have some requirements, but I teach a weekly class that you can come and join," I said warmly, wishing her all the best. Slightly embarrassed, she walked ahead of me to get her passport scanned and checked. I did not see her in the baggage hall after that incident. As the stern officer at the counter checked my details, I remember thinking to myself that if we do not deal with others sensitively, we could ruin our relationship with them. Being attentive in our relationships is crucial to our success. How we behave towards others determines the quality of our life. "It's just my personality" is not an acceptable excuse to be insensitive towards others. My golden rule to know whether or not you are being adequately sensitive to another person is, treat someone better than you would like to be treated. Ask yourself the question, does my tone of voice, body language, and behavior reflect sensitivity? As soon as I finished, Harry asked, "So did you see her again? Was she able to forgive the person who spoke harshly to her?" Fortunately, she did return and started attending my Gita sessions in the evening. I would say she forgave him. "That's great." Harry paused as if thinking of how to shift the subject of our conversation to himself. So he started. "With my wife, it can be difficult to be sensitive. I work such long hours. When I come back home tired, she can say things that are so infuriating that I cannot control what I say. It's hard when you live so close to someone at all times." "Familiarity breeds contempt," I replied. "When we are overly familiar with people, we forget how important they are to us and the correct way to behave with them. I live with over 100 other monks and I assure you, it is challenging, no doubt. However, a lesson I learned over 20 years ago changed how I acted in my relationships from then on. Attitude does not discriminate. I am not always flying around the world giving seminars. In Mumbai, I like to be just another monk, one of the many. Before I decided to dedicate my life to being a monk, I was a pampered boy growing up in a middle-class family in Pune. Like most children around the world, I feel I had, and have, the best mother. She took care of everything. She would cook only what I wanted to eat and would wash all my clothes. I was never kept waiting for anything. Therefore, you can imagine how shocking and worrisome it was for her when I decided to pursue the life of a monk. Who would cook for me? Who would clean for me? Who would wash my clothes? The answers to those questions were, cooking was done communally, but for everything else, you were on your own. It was a steep learning curve. Washing my clothes for the first time was an ordeal. We did not have a washing machine, it was just 2 buckets and a handful of soap. This was the old school method of washing your clothes. Let your garments soak for 30 minutes in detergent and water and then rinse them in another bucket of clean water. No need for a gym membership, this style of washing made for sufficient exercise. In fact, I was pleasantly surprised at my biceps getting bigger simply from squeezing the excess water from my clothes. One day, I went to wash my clothes that had already been soaking for 40 minutes in the soapy water. I was in a rush, I had to deliver a talk in Borivali. on the other side of the city. I now had to face the tribulation of rinsing my clothes. I opened the tap, water gurgled through the steel pipes and straight onto the floor of the bathroom. Reacting swiftly, I kicked a bucket under the tap. "What were you doing?" a grave voice asked from behind me. It was one of the older monks. "Just washing my clothes," I replied respectfully. "Yes, I can see that." "But what were you doing?" he asked again. "Just washing my clothes," I repeated. His eyes rolled and he frowned. "Yes, I can see that." "But what were you doing?" he said, enunciating each word slowly. "Just washing my clothes," I retorted, losing my patience. "What's the problem?" I was going to be late for an important talk I was meant to deliver. "Why did you kick the bucket?" he asked. "It's just a bucket, I had to get it under the tap quickly." "It's no big deal." "No big deal?" he questioned. "It is a big deal. Gaur Gopal, I want to share with you what I have learned about relationships. When we treat inanimate objects, like buckets, or our possessions, with disrespect or insensitivity, we will end up treating people the same. At one point in my life, I seemed to be losing a lot of my friends, and I heard this advice from one of my guides. Insensitivity becomes part of our general attitude, and our instinct does not discriminate between things and people. Hence, when we treat our things badly, we might notice that insensitivity gradually creeping into our relationships with the people around us. Then he patted me on my back, smiling, and walked away singing an Indian bhajan. I folded my hands in reverence and turned off the tap to reflect on what had happened. This whole universe is connected, as are the parts of our life. When we treat things with disrespect, we may start doing the same with the people we love. All aspects of our life are integrated. In modern culture, it is common to use things once and throw them away. For example, plastic cups. In 2016, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation reported at the World Economic Forum that we will have more plastic in the sea than fish by 2050 if we continue producing the substance at this rate. If we can have this mentality with our things, we may end up introducing disposability in our relationships as well. The memory of my mother, who is a voracious reader, reading the classic books of Indian literature to me is still vivid in my mind. She would be telling me, on the verge of acting out, exhilarating stories of gods and demons fighting over Mother Earth and of Mother Ganges flowing towards the sea, sustaining all forms of life through this journey. She would also tell me about Mother Cow, who is considered sacred in our tradition. The earth and the river Ganges are inanimate and the cow is but an animal. But in the mystical culture of the East, we are taught to treat them just like we would our own mother. With that level of respect for things, it's easy to see why people who practice genuine spirituality are typically known to have strong interpersonal bonds. I've never heard it explained like that before. But you know something? Ronaldo and Messi would get the shock of their lives if they heard this story. Their whole life is based on kicking a football and scoring goals, Harry chuckled. It's not about kicking or not kicking, I said. Everything has its utility and must be used in that particular way. Would you ever use a ruler to measure the temperature? I hope not. We should use things for the purpose they have been designed for, but should treat them with the utmost dignity, value, and respect. But I tend to compartmentalize my life, Harry said. I don't see every aspect of my life as fully connected. I am used to putting things in boxes like, this is my work, these are my relationships, and this is my spirituality, he said, using his hands to illustrate his point. There are two sides to that. For practical purposes, We will often benefit from putting things into compartments, but we should know that the way we act in one area of our life can have dire consequences in another. I suppose so. In conflicts with my wife, maybe I have a role to play. Maybe I am being insensitive to her. It takes two hands to clap. Maybe she is just mirroring my reaction in the way she responds to me, he said. Yes, at times, we incite the response that people give us. When we look at them while keeping in mind that we also need to improve things about ourselves, it is easier to assess how we should behave with others, I replied. Let's talk about how we can see the positive in our relationships. Always remember, we must be sensitive with our words and actions. Being sensitive means to think about how the other person may feel before we say or do something. For example, Mansi's negative experience at the ashram that I reside in affected her outlook on the whole community. How do we practice being sensitive? We must treat even inanimate objects with consideration and respect. If we do not, then the mentality of insensitivity may become a part of our general attitude. One's instinct or general attitude does not discriminate between things and people. Treating things badly can affect our attitude negatively, which may percolate into our relationships. 9. A virtuous vision. There are many ways to perceive others. We should start choosing the one which magnifies the positive and avoids the negative. On Proverbs 11:27 it says, anyone can find the dirt in someone. Be the one that finds the gold. With car horns blaring around us and crows squawking above us, we were still stuck, but were also edging closer to our destination. We still did not know what was causing the traffic jam. Harry asked if he could switch off the air conditioning, saying, "The AC gives me a sore throat sometimes. Is it okay if I open the window a little? I hope you don't mind." "Of course not," I replied as we both rolled down the windows a few centimeters. "Please continue with what you were saying," Harry said. I was about to begin speaking when a bumblebee flew into the car. Bees are usually harmless, but in such a confined space, Harry and I both threw our heads back against the headrests and remained completely still. Our yellow and black friend buzzed around the dashboard of the car. Mesmerized by the jasmine-scented car fragrance flowing out of the vents, it was probably looking for flowers. When it realized there was no pollen in our vehicle, it flew away merrily, singing the song all bees sing. "That was close," Harry said, now visibly relieved. "That bee was huge. I'm just thankful it was not its passionate and angry cousin," I said, referring to wasps. "The bee teaches us so much," I said, as a thought came to my mind. "They are always looking for the nectar that flowers possess and avoid lingering where there is dirt. We should be like the bee, always seeing the best in people and choosing to avoid their faults. How is it possible to do that? It seems too tough to me, given how my relationships are," Harry replied. "It all depends on what we look for. I have learned that there are 5 different ways we can perceive people in our relationships. Let me tell you a bit more about it. Type 1, a person who cannot see the good at all. The first type of person only sees the bad and tends to magnify it out of proportion. Possibly arising out of spite, dislike, or insecurity, they just cannot see any good qualities that another person may possess. As much as you may try to explain to them about someone's goodness, they refuse to change their opinion. They see a speck of dirt on someone's face and look at it as if the entire body of the person were bathed in mud. I am reminded of a story that I heard some time back. There was a young couple who lived in a nice home in a beautiful neighborhood. For some reason, the wife just did not like the woman who was their next door neighbor. One morning, as they were having breakfast, the lady looked out of the window and saw her neighbor hanging clothes on the clothesline. "Look at that," she said to her husband. "Did you see how dirty their clothes are even after washing them? I am shocked that a middle-aged housewife like her doesn't know how to wash clothes clean. Maybe she should go back to her mom's home and take lessons on how to wash correctly." Her husband listened silently. Every single time her neighbor would hang her clothes to dry, the young woman wouldn't miss a chance to make some sly comments. After a few weeks, the wife saw her neighbor hanging clothes on the clothesline again. But this time something was different. "Did you see that? Amazing," the surprised wife said to her husband. "Finally her clothes are clean. I am sure she did not wash them. Someone else must have done it for her." Without even getting up from his seat to look at the neighbor's clothes, the husband responded, "You know something, darling? I got up early this morning and washed our windows. Isn't it a fact that what we see in others depends on the window we are looking through? Washing our own windows can change our vision. But type 1 people don't even agree that their windows are dirty, what to speak of cleaning them. They not only continue to perceive the clean laundry as dirty but also keep bad-mouthing it." Type 2, a person who sees both the good and the bad, but chooses to neglect the good. The second type of person sees the good and bad in people, but make a conscious decision to neglect the good and focus on the bad. Like some people have selective hearing, people of this type have a selective mindset. Many of my videos have gone viral over the last few years, but they do not come close to matching the popularity of dog videos. We tend to be infatuated by dogs, so much so that we are left wondering what we did to deserve this faithful friend. An interesting story reveals how devoted dogs are. I don't know how far it is true, though. A man was once buying groceries from a supermarket. He was pushing his trolley whilst looking at the scribbled list his wife gave him when he crashed into another trolley. "Sorry," he exclaimed automatically. But what he saw shocked him. It was a dog pushing the other shopping trolley and picking up a variety of things. Amazed, he followed the dog around from aisle to aisle, snooping on his every move. The dog picked up fruits, chocolate, bread, pasta, a bag's worth of provisions. Then he went up to the cashier and pulled out a few dollar bills to make the payment. The monotonous cashier was unfazed. It seemed as if he was familiar with this furry friend. The man then saw that the cashier gave the dog $10 less. The dog barked and tugged at the cashier's trouser leg until he gave him the correct balance. How is this possible? The man thought, standing there, gobsmacked. I have to find out who owns this intelligent dog. The man followed the dog all the way to its home on the 15th floor of an apartment block. You guessed it, the dog pressed the correct floor on the elevator, reached a dark blue door and dropped the shopping. He then began to scratch on the door, making a whining sound to get the attention of his owner. After some time, the owner opened the door and started shouting at the dog, "You useless, ungrateful, good-for-nothing animal. I hope you got everything." Then they both went inside. The man was even more bewildered now. Did the dog's owner really just say that? Curious, he knocked on the door 3 times, twiddling his thumbs, anxious to ask the owner why he had shouted at his genius dog. It opened. "Yes," the owner asked rudely. Sir, I just had a question. I noticed that your dog did all the shopping from the supermarket for you, managed to get the correct change from the cashier, walked all the way back to this building, pressed the right number on the elevator. He is unbelievable. Why did you shout at him? I have to know why." "Yes. All that's normal for him. But this is the second time he's forgotten the keys to the house. It's pathetic. I had to get up and open the door." The man stood outside the apartment with his mouth wide open in disbelief at what he had just heard. Isn't this the story of our lives? Our friends and family are doing so many good things, but we neglect them and focus solely on the negatives. Wonderful things are occurring all around us, and within the people we love, but this type of person can only think about how the other forgot the key. Type 3, a person who sees the good and the bad and is neutral to both. The next type is a person who sees good and bad in others, he doesn't focus on the bad, but is unconcerned about the good as well. Such people are disconnected from everyone and everything, either due to their self-absorption or indifference, and they just don't care. It is nearly impossible to find such a person. Type 4, a person who sees good and bad, but consciously chooses to neglect the bad. Then there are those who see the good and bad but consciously choose to neglect the bad and focus on the good. It is tough for people to live by this, as they have to make the conscious effort to stay away from the natural human tendency to see the bad. It can take a lot of work to continuously see the good. A recent article about the late industrialist Aditya Birla featured in the Speaking Tree section of the Times of India succinctly highlights the characteristics of this type of person. Aditya Birla was the CEO of the multi-billion-dollar company Hindalco Industries. The article is about one of his senior executives who lost the company millions of dollars by mistake. Any other leader would have fired if not sued the employee, but not Aditya Birla. Before he had a meeting with him, Birla took out a notepad and wrote a title at the top, "Points in favor of this employee." He then made a list of all the strengths this man had, including the time he had made the company millions of dollars. Aditya Birla had consciously chosen to shift his attention to all the good that this executive had done for the company before making any judgment or dealing with the mistake. As news spread throughout the company that Birla did not sack this employee, a philosophy and culture of sensitive dealings evolved within the organization. Another senior executive in the company wrote, "Whenever I am tempted to reprimand someone, I convince myself to sit down and write a list of all the good qualities they have. This may not necessarily change my decision, but it helps me put things into perspective and control my anger." To focus on the good and deal with the bad is a principle that can save relationships and help us make the right decision. Type 5, a person who cannot see the bad at all, they see the slightest good and magnify it. This stage can only be possible for God, or for one who has reached the heights of spirituality. To see only the good in someone's character, or to magnify the slight good to the point where it overshadows their ills, is a great feat, but one which is impractical for most of us to follow. The ideal state for our relationships to flourish is to come to stage 4. The human condition is such that we love to gossip about the faults of others. We open our eyes and see only dirt. However, with practice, we can come to the stage of seeing both the good and the bad, and consciously make the decision to focus on the good and neglect the bad. I have never heard an explanation like that before. Harry exclaimed. "It's not my analysis, I heard it from Srila Prabhupada's followers," I replied. "Can you clarify one thing? How do you totally neglect the bad?" Neglecting the bad does not mean that we do not deal with it practically. It just means that we do not allow our mind to focus on and hover over the bad. Exactly. Harry seemed to agree with the point vehemently, though I don't think he fully understood it. With my wife, I tend not to neglect the bad, but deal with it. He paused. I try to deal with it sensitively in my opinion, but it always creates an awkward air around us and leaves her feeling hurt, I think. Then she starts making sarcastic comments to me. Then I tell her not to, but the vicious cycle starts again. It's frustrating. Always remember, seeing the best in people can be challenging at times, especially when we are in constant proximity to them. We can perceive people in the following 5 ways. See only bad and magnify it. See good and bad, neglect the good and focus on the bad. See good and bad, and be neutral to both. See good and bad, choose to focus on the good and neglect the bad. See the good and magnify it. The ideal state is the fourth stage, in which one's relationships flourish. Reaching the fourth stage takes consistent hard work and practice. 10. Correcting cautiously. Corrective feedback can make or break our relationships. It is strange that sword and words have the same letters. Even more strange is that they have the same effect if not handled properly. Most of the time our frustration comes from improper dealings in our relationships, I said, trying to console Harry. And this stems from our poor communication, whether it's our body language, actions, or words. We must take full responsibility for our relationships, I continued. But if I'm always thinking about what to say to not upset my wife, that would make life miserable and so calculated, Harry retorted. I sighed. Harry, yes, we must choose our words carefully when we are correcting others, but before that we must learn to invest appreciation in them. I settled down to explain in detail. Investment before withdrawal. In 2017, at the end of September, I was invited to speak at the Bombay Stock Exchange on the topic of Indian culture empowering work-life balance. The venue was what you would expect it to be. A large, round auditorium, a grand stage lined with a velvet red carpet and 150 executives from stock exchanges around the world. It was a prestigious event, and I felt honored to be invited to speak there. A point that I made there seemed to resonate with the high-flying audience. I said, our mutual funds and our relationships have one thing in common: we must invest in both before we can withdraw. And this is how it is many times we forget to invest appreciation and love into a person before we correct them. This can leave them feeling demotivated and not cherished. Learning the art of appreciation is vital for building healthy relationships. I realized this when I was traveling in Nepal. I remember how, even as my teeth chattered and my body shivered, my eyes gazed at the beauty that surrounded me. It was bitterly cold in Muktinath, at the foot of the Thorongla mountain pass in the Himalayas. Muktinath is a sacred place for Hindus and Buddhists alike. For the Hindus, it the place where the natural form of Lord Vishnu is found downstream at Kali Gandaki. And for the Buddhists it is a place where important gods and goddesses have resided. A few monks, including myself, had taken a group of families to this beautiful part of the world for a spiritual retreat. After spending some time discussing the significance of the place we were at, we returned to our accommodation. The purpose of this trip was not only to visit all the places of spiritual virtue but, more importantly, to spend time with these families. There is no substitute to spending quality time with each other, and I have found that open communication with people in the midst of nature can do wonders to strengthen bonds. There could have been no better backdrop for this than the Himalayas. As I returned to the townhouse that we had rented, I flicked open my laptop to check my email. Although time had stopped for me whilst I was away on this spiritual retreat, it had not for people in Mumbai who had pressing issues to discuss with me. As I scrolled through my inbox, scanning for anything imperative, a flagged email caught my eye. Your visa to Ukraine has been approved. Your passport is ready to be collected from Delhi, or will take 5 working days to reach your chosen address. 5 working days. I panicked. Another monk and I were meant to fly to Ukraine in 3 days' time, as soon as we landed in Mumbai. There was no way I could miss my flight to Ukraine. My spiritual teacher Radhanath Swami had personally asked me to visit. I immediately got up. I started planning in my head. I ran into the communal area of the house. Everyone was laughing and warming up over some herbal tea, their woolen hats and gloves drying on the radiators. Thinking it was appropriate, I asked one of the senior monks, out of courtesy, if I could fly to Delhi slightly earlier to pick up my passport from the Ukrainian consulate. The bus and train journey to Delhi from Kathmandu was a grueling 34 hours. A flight was only a couple of hours, saving me valuable time in my race to get to Eastern Europe. "How are you planning to go?" he asked me whilst sipping on hot ginger tea. "Flight, it's only a few hours," I said confidently. "And who's going to pay for that flight?" I sensed that this was not going to go my way. Well, not wanting to say the temple, which was already low on funds, I have to go because my passport is in Delhi. "We won't reach Ukraine in time if I do not get my passport by tomorrow morning," I pleaded. The noise of people talking quietened as they homed in on our conversation. The senior monk put his tea down. "I do not think it's a good idea. You can travel with us by train to Delhi and then proceed to Ukraine a few days later," he said authoritatively. Our tickets were already booked. However, I left it at that and went to my room to let things settle down. In the evening, the senior monk gave a small lecture to the group, narrating stories about the sights we had seen. As we approached dinner time, I brought up the topic with him again. It was vital that I get to Ukraine. He got up and started to raise his voice in front of everybody. "I already told you that this is not possible. Why are you bringing it up again? Don't you have any manners?" He went on ridiculing me for what seemed like 5 long minutes. It was humiliating. All these families knew me personally, their kids looked up to me as a role model, and here I was being slandered publicly. I walked away to my room. I paced up and down our 3-meter-long room with bunk beds on either side, panting shallowly. My eyes teared up. Thoughts rushed through my head. How could somebody speak to me like that? I thought we were friends. He doesn't understand how important my flight to Ukraine is. In anger, it is so easy to lash out. When our ego is crushed, our emotions run wild. I controlled myself, took a deep breath in and said a prayer. Silently I decided to press pause. He had a point. The temple was tight on finances. It was inappropriate to ask the families traveling with us for funding, and I could not just abandon them on this trip. These were the practical reasons I listed to help me calm down. It helped, but only slightly. I closed my eyes, and like a flashback, I remember at all my years in the ashram that the senior monk had nurtured me and was a friend to me when times were tough. He was the one who made me feel like the ashram was my home. He had not treated me this way before during all this time that I had known him. He had always been investing love, kindness, and trust in me. It was not like him to lash out like this. Was there something on his mind? I washed my face and returned to where everybody had congregated. It smelled like tomato soup and freshly baked bread, but as I walked into the room, the tension was palpable. I went in as if nothing had happened and behaved like I always did. He glanced at me and our eyes met, our subtle method of apologizing and forgiving. You could see people sighing with relief. I had forgiven him. We did not bring up the issue again. The Kathmandu bus station was bustling in the morning, people selling tea from metal containers, porters running with people's bags on their carts, and tourists in shorts and huge cameras being harassed by kids who wanted a few rupees. It was a scene similar to most South Asian transport terminals. We traveled by bus for 10 hours to Gorakhpur, where our journey would continue by train. It was a quick transition between bus and train. We had tickets for a sleeper class cabin, where seats could turn into 3-tiered bunk beds. I was excited to see the blue berths as my neck was slightly sore from sitting in the bus for half a day. I settled down next to the window and watched as the train picked up speed and weaved through the divine countryside. 30 minutes into the journey, the senior monk came and solemnly sat down next to me. He held my hand, and with tears flowing down his face, apologized for how he had treated me. I couldn't help but cry with him. I had never seen him so emotional. When we see people we love feeling upset, we naturally feel upset, too. I also apologized to him, saying that I should not have pushed him and that his concerns were valid. He did not accept my apology and insisted that it was all his fault. Indeed, true forgiveness contributes to forming the strongest bonds between friends. A few weeks later, when we got together with all the families for an event, we asked them what the highlights of their trip to Nepal had been. We were expecting them to say that they loved the mystic temples, the scenery of Kathmandu, or even our lectures. None of them said that. They all unanimously agreed that the highlight had been seeing the friendship between me and the senior monk. From an unpleasant exchange to deep forgiveness, they were astonished at the depth of our bond. To this day, he remains one of my closest friends. Only when we invest in people can we correct them. Sometimes this is done strongly, but we are all human. Mistakes happen and tempers are lost. But if our investments in others are strong, if we give them the care, love, and appreciation they deserve, these little withdrawals come across as sprinkles of rain and not as torrential monsoons. This does not mean that we never give corrective feedback, but we need to learn the art of doing it correctly. Let me explain. Corrective feedback, an art. Beyond any other need, the greatest longing of every individual is to give love and to be loved. It is our relationships that allow this mantra to come to fruition. However, it is surprising that the relationships we cherish and keep so close to our heart can easily be neglected and abused. For the most parts, this is not done on purpose, but out of ignorance and an inability to understand how one should behave. We may have the right intentions, but giving advice inappropriately may do more harm than good. That is why we must learn to do it properly, and it takes practice and introspection to develop this ability. Anytime you feel the need to give corrective feedback to someone, think of these 4 questions. Am I the right person to give corrective feedback? Is it appropriate for you to correct that person? There is a joke that every woman thinks that the best child in the world is her child, and every man thinks that the best wife in the world is the neighbor's wife. We would all scream at someone else's child who is about to injure itself, but we are not talking of those exceptional situations. In any other situation, would you give corrective feedback to someone else's child? Would you give feedback to another's spouse? In most situations, you would not. Therefore, we have to think, am I the right person to give this feedback, or is someone else better suited? Am I a relative? Am I a friend? Am I an authority in any way to give correct feedback? If the answer to any of these questions is yes, then you can proceed to the next one. Do I have the right motive to give corrective feedback? It is said that we can control 2 things in our life, our desires and our motives. Our desires govern what we want, and our motives tell us why we want it. In many cases, we may correct others because we want to settle old accounts. We may have a grudge against them, and we may use the opportunity to correct them, simply to exact our vengeance. But this should not be our motive. It should be to help them as a friend. We should be conscientious that our motive is appropriate. We want to help them come out of the wrong they are doing. Feedback from a place of love may seem unpalatable, but it tastes the sweetest if done appropriately and has the right effect. Do I know the right way to give corrective feedback? Jack was an electrical engineer. His days were exhausting and mentally demanding. He would need to deal with complex physics as part of his design work. One oversight could lead to his company losing crores of rupees, or worse, him getting fired. It was a Thursday and Jack was the most tired he had ever been. All he wanted to do was to eat dinner with his wife, Jill. As you may have guessed by now, this story is made up, but I promise you, it serves a purpose. Jill was a chef by profession and loved treating her husband to her new, experimental dishes. She was excited for him to come home so he could taste her new recipe for soup. When Jack came home, his face was drained of color from fatigue. He threw his briefcase on the floor, loosened his tie, greeted his wife and sat at the dining table. "This soup looks delicious," he said. "It's a special recipe that I have been working on all day. I wanted you to taste it first," a giddy Jill said. Jack took a ladle and poured himself the creamy red soup. He looked up at his beaming wife, watching her every move. She slid a spoon across the table for him and then put both hands under her chin, elbows on the dining table, and leaned forward. Jack slurped a spoonful. "Tomatoes, good. Chilies, good. Salt, bad." The soup was totally bland. "What would you do in this situation? You've just had a terrible day at work. How would you tell your wife about the poor quality of her cooking?" Thankfully, Jack engineered a plan on the spot. He grabbed another spoon from the cutlery drawer and said, smiling, "It's been so long since I've lovingly fed you. Come and try this." Saying so, he fed her some soup. "Oh, I forgot the salt," she jumped up, arriving at the conclusion by herself. Jack could have easily criticized his wife's soup using unkind words. Instead, he chose to give his feedback with sensitivity. People are usually resilient. They can stand being wrong, but only when it is pointed out to them with love. Being blunt and abusive can be emotionally draining for both, and the person receiving the feedback switches off after some time. As is commonly said, it was not what you said, it's how you said it. Our tone of voice, body language, and facial expressions account for more than the words we use. Is it the right time? The most ironic moment of my life occurred at Soho Square, central London. I had just finished giving a 1-hour presentation on overcoming fault finding, and a man came up to me at the end and said, "Thank you for the class, but I really hated it." I sat there stunned as he listed in detail what he did not like about the class and my delivery. I felt as Jill would have if Jack had shrieked about the bland soup. It was horrible to experience someone giving me harsh feedback immediately after I had poured my heart and soul out. It may have been the case that my talk was atrocious, but like a man who misses his flight, this person had got the timing all wrong. If he had said the same things to me a few days later, we would have both been in a better state of mind. We should not simply let our anger loose, we should explain it. When we express what we feel, we do so at the risk of seeming unpleasant, but when we take the time to explain our emotions to people, they might be able to empathize with us. The bottom line, hotheads do not give good feedback, choose a better time. Taking the time to ask these 4 questions before giving somebody correctional feedback can change one's life. To understand them deeply, contemplation and discussion with someone more experienced than oneself are required, as every situation is different. The principles remain the same in every situation, but the application may vary on a case-to-case basis, depending on the gravity of the situation or even our relationship with the person. We would not correct our spouses in the same manner we would our children. One size does not fit all, neither do our methods to correct. This practice will take some time to implement, and form into a habit, Harry said, as he looked away from the steering wheel momentarily to look at me. "You're right," I nodded. Having the knowledge of something is far from mastering it. Giving feedback badly is an addiction. Just as a smoker knows that cigarettes can kill him but smokes nonetheless, similarly the way we interact with others becomes an addiction. We know when we are careless, but our habits force us to act in a certain way. Harry's expression reverted to one I had seen earlier in this car journey. His face dropped and his breathing slowed. "When I return from the office I am usually stressed," he whispered. "I am not like that guy in the story. I really lash out over trivial issues. I did not realize that all these small acts of contempt could lead up to what happened the other night. Lolita and I got into a huge argument over something trivial which I can't even remember now. The fight reached its crescendo, and she screamed at me saying she wanted a divorce. Divorce? How can she want a divorce after all we have been through?" At this point, Harry was talking to himself, churning his emotions. What would my family think if I got divorced? Would my friends judge me? I suppose being careless about little things can really prove to be fatal. But I really do love my wife, and I know I need to change, but how can I ever forgive her for saying something so cruel and hurtful? Another question loaded with emotion, I thought to myself. I looked out of the car window. We were driving past couples holding hands and walking along the coastline. I said, "Let me tell you about something worse. Saying things in anger damages our relationships. Hence, we should try to avoid doing so. If we need to give corrective feedback, we should invest tons of praise and trust into a person before doing so." Think, with regard to the story in Nepal, I could deal with the emotional hurt because I realized how much the individual correcting me had done for me in the past. Corrective feedback is an art. It has 4 principles. Ask yourself, am I the right person to give corrective feedback? Do I have the right motive to give corrective feedback? Do I know the right way to give corrective feedback? Is it the right time? The smooth implementation of these 4 principles takes time because giving corrective feedback insensitively has become an addictive habit for many.